I've been watching a lot of the coverage on the Skeptic Feminist, Russian Deadpool, his alleged murder of Ivy, and I had some things about the PTSD aspect of it that I wanted to say, and it's probably more healthy to do this than shout at the fucking computer or the wall. And part of it is that the PTSD, the idea that this is something that caused it, was it kind of upsets me. I'm a former military member, and I have friends that have PTSD. I have friends that committed suicide, and the idea that this, the use of it as a shield, and it's a very often used thing nowadays. It's it can be. I'm not going to want to say it's overdiagnosed, but it seems to be that a lot of people kind of like, oh yeah, the attention brought to it, and people are like, oh well, I can use that, and it can be used as an excuse and as a shield for actions. The guy who killed Chris Kyle was also said, PTSD, but from what his statements that he's made, he was just a piece of shit. It wasn't PTSD. He was trying to use that excuse, and it seems like I don't know if people may have very good intentions and they're saying like, oh, they don't want to question, they want to be like, oh man, we should really have taken care of this person. But from all the records that I've seen on Russian Deadpool, it seems that he served the National Guard, which is 1 week in a month, 2 weeks a year, for 3 years, and was never deployed and was a quartermaster, which means that he was a kind of a supply guy, an inventory guy. He had equipment in charge. He was not in charge of actual combat. It was not a combat role. Not to say that he couldn't get PTSD elsewhere and that it's not an important job or anything, but it wasn't a combat role. And even if he did deploy, for all the records that I've seen, it seems that he hadn't. And I could be wrong. I could not have all the information, obviously. But he would probably never leave the wire and be in a combat situation for real. He'd be a more rear echelon, issuing equipment, taking inventory, things like that. He was not, a combat arms soldier. And he was National Guard, which is just, it's not, the training is not a level of the active duty. You just get a couple weeks a year where you carry a gun, and it's just the training and the level is not the same. And one thing that I understand, people are trying to bring attention to it, and they say that, but over and over again, you see people like, oh, well, PTSD, and he had this paranoid, he had flashbacks, and it's like, generally, people with PTSD do not commit violence against others. There's a high rate of self-harm, much more likely. And people don't, and today, it's good that people want to be sensitive to that and, treat those people that have those issues, because we haven't always in the past. And it's you understand the compassion that people feel, but at the same time, it's not an excuse. It's not the shield to stop you from doing something like this. And far too many times you see people going, oh, well, PTSD, well, I've had nightmares and had sleep disturbances, but I wouldn't say that it was just more of a, I wouldn't feel like I'm crazy. And that, of course, my experience is different than others. And I've never been diagnosed with PTSD, and unless somebody has a diagnosis, you can't do a lot of things, and you can't say that he did without an actual, professional saying this. And that PTSD is experienced differently by every person. But too many times the people are like, oh, the PTSD, and it sounds much more like this mental issues that this guy had were much more of an. And the PTSD, it sounds like he was a liar and he was controlling, and his mental, if he had some kind of mental illness or had some mental deficiency that he had, other than that, but I just see the blanket use of the PTSD to protect, like, he had PTSD, and so, he had a psychotic, and generally, that's not a very common thing. It's a complete psychotic break of a person with PTSD. It's two different things, and not to say that there aren't those occasions where people with PTSD have acted in violent ways because but it tends to be much more likely that there's another issue that they are violent first of all, and then or there are other factors that come into play with it, and it's just kind of an annoying thing, and to see people like they don't, there's some people that were like, oh, don't question it, and it's understandably you want to be sensitive, you don't want to go out there and be like, oh, no, you don't have PTSD, but in that way it acts like as a shield, as an excuse for actions that are all on you in the end. You are responsible for your own actions, and it sucks if these mental problems you have, influence your action, but in the end, you're responsible. PTSD does not generally present as actual violent action outward, much more likely to be self-harm. And so I kind of got annoyed with that, the whole idea that somehow, like, oh, it's PTSD, don't make fun of him, he didn't know he's doing. Okay, but you did something, you did that, and it much more likely to have to do with his own mental issues, and the fact that in the end this guy probably may not have even had PTSD, and it doesn't appear that he had any kind of military reason, any kind of combat for that. So these ideas that somehow it influenced from military, I just, it's not even established. So it was just annoying to me to watch that and hear that, having known people that have had, committed suicide, and have had people that have had a hard time to suffer through PTSD because they, their experiences. And I felt like it was too many people who are trying to, just drop a label of PTSD on it and say, oh yeah, I definitely influenced. We're not saying that it was caused it, but you're saying that it caused it. And I just wanted to say that and be a little more healthy than yelling at my wall. Thanks.